Okay. Okay, so this session is going to be a bit different, but it will be somewhat structured. I said I wanted to have questions, and I do, and most of the session will be about answering questions, but I wanted to create a structure, not a structure for the questions. You can ask me anything non-political, but I thought I'd put something forth that might help you create questions, okay? So I wanted to explain this, take maybe just 5 minutes to start, and I will share. Actually, I don't want to share it there. I will share this board that is actually a learning board for the ACES curriculum, but I realized I thought it'd be a really good one for here. So I'm going to put this though where you can, well, it's just too easy to mess things up. So I'm going to just put it where you can comment. No, maybe I'll make it so you can edit. I can always back up things. Okay, so, and I'm going to make it so you don't have to log in. So just have the link. So you should not have to log in this way. Logging in doesn't cost you anything anyway, but some people don't like to do it. You get on people's mailing lists and all that. So I appreciate that. So I'm going to put this in the chat. And when you see new people coming in, if you could, somebody could just keep adding it in there because it doesn't, that's a feature that allows us to talk about people who aren't here yet. But other than that, I can't understand why they don't just let you see the history of things. Okay, so here's what I've been doing. I've been thinking a lot about just the whole Agile scenario. And I think what's holding it back in general is, in some sense, you could say there's an awful lot, and that's what I have here. What I would say, these are the problems. So you might look at this to see if you have these problems, and you could ask me which ones you want me to answer. There are problems, causes, solutions, benefits, and I'm adding notes. This link might be bad, but I'm adding notes where I have links to get more information. Now, I'm not sure how much I'm going to continue this because all the information is in the ACE program, but I may not make it all available publicly just because of the work involved. But there's also a lot of this. I mean, there's so many. These aren't even all of them. I just started dumping some of them down. I mean, I've got probably 30 or 40 things in a Word document where there are things that are said like a matter of fact. Like the earth is flat. We don't challenge it. No, it is. It's flat. We know it's flat. You can look and see it's flat. And these are some I've put down. Maybe while you guys are working, I'll throw some others down. I have a Word document that just has literally pages of this stuff. But before y'all start, I like to distill things down. Sometimes it makes it too abstract, so that's okay. But I just wanted to say things. When I step back and I look at what's really missing or what's wrong or where our problems are coming from, I would say they're all sourced by just four things. There's a lack of theory. People say Agile takes a scientific approach, and it absolutely does not take a scientific approach. Where you have a problem and you see how to solve the problem, and then you remember how you solved it, that is not the scientific approach. That's called whack-a-mole, otherwise known as inspect and adapt. The scientific approach is you have problems, you see them, you also have a model of understanding. And as you solve the problem, you improve your model of understanding and you question your model of understanding. The model of understanding is often an after effect of solving the problem, but can also be a forward-looking thing where you're trying something that has never been done. Einstein once said, scientists study things that have been, engineers create things that have never been done. So it's kind of like an engineering approach as well. And there is no accepted theory in the Agile space. That's why when we talk about it at Amplio University, we talk about verifiable theory, meaning you can verify it, and we come from that. Okay, so this isn't existing in Scrum at all. In fact, they've denied it exists, and SAFe doesn't do much about it, even though they present some stuff to look good. but then they don't base their system on it. So it's like, here's all this great stuff, but we're going to do this. They don't say we're going to do this, but there is a disparity there. Not being driven by value first. This is the big thing from Tom Gill. Now, I realize when I go in retrospect, I realize I've actually been doing this since the 80s. But it just seemed a natural matter of course. And then when Agile came out, it kind of got lost. And I kind of got lost realizing that's what I did to state it explicitly. If you don't explicitly talk about what you're talking about, the old mantra of we don't think and talk about what we see what we think and talk about comes into effect. So we need to be thinking about being driven. I should say not being driven by Agile first. This is why we can't get alignment. In Amplio, we do this. I've actually started putting up the curriculum more to just make it more visible, and it's certainly not worth looking at yet, but I'm going to pull it up just so I can, hopefully I actually did this one. Well, I'm not sure I put I think I put it under Amplio at scale. I'm just starting to build this, but like there's a way that in Amplio, we have a step process to look at what you drive from value. And this is going to get expanded more, but we've talked about this in the sessions. Anyway, coming back here, I want problems here. The high cost of education. Now, of course, nobody talks about this, but I would suggest ongoing education is 10 times more expensive than it should be or needs to be. That's a pretty dramatic claim when you think about it. I'm not talking about when a consultant comes in and is going to do a workshop to get the whole group started. That's very useful to bring somebody in for a few days and work, 2 or 3 intense days or maybe half days over a week or two, because you have more collaboration and coordination and understanding and agreeing on what we're going to do. So getting charged $3,000 to $5,000 a day for that type of training is definitely usable. I mean, it's reasonable because you're training one person to 10, 20, 30 people. So it's expensive doing training for 10, 20, 30 people. But with today's technology, there's no reason we're not running trainings with hundreds of people, kind of the format of Amplio University. This is what I've been trying to figure out. I look out on LinkedIn and I see the problems people have and the advice people are giving. And I'm like saying, man, this should be just known. Why isn't this just known? Well, there are 2 reasons why this isn't just known. One is there's no theory to use. So people have to learn from the ground up instead of being able to use what they know. People also don't like things that don't have a theory behind them. They may not say that, but I've talked about this many times. Experience without theory is not only not that useful, it's very often resisted. And then not being driven by value first means you get these little pockets and local optimizations. And then it's really ironic to me that Agile is supposed to be about people, and yet you don't see much at all about how people learn, how they resist, how they interact and communicate. It's not in Scrum, it's not in Safe, it's not in Kanban. It's not in anything that I see. Now, if you're based on the theory of constraints, there's a fair amount of it implied because theory of constraints has a lot. The evaporating cloud, inherent simplicity. So I will say if you're basing on theory of constraint, those inherently have a lot about people because they're organized a lot about people. This is one of the most amazing things about theory of constraints to me is how broad it is and how deep it is. And it's also about how to do better critical thinking, which is also missing in every other spot I notice. So I'm going to suggest that almost all of our problems are somehow rooted in these 4 things. Okay, now I point this out for a reason. What I want you all to do, and could somebody, if they haven't already, redo that the link in the chat. So if the people noticed a couple people came in late. Thank you. Okay, so here's what I've done. I've created 2 tables here. And don't change anything in the table. Actually, probably could lock it down. So I'm going to lock it down because not that anybody would do something maliciously, but my experience is with when you're using a new tool, people make mistakes real easily. And okay, so I'm going to lock this down. Maybe I can't lock it down. That's weird. It's funny. Maybe with a custom table, I'm not allowed to lock it down. I can lock most other things down, but I don't see the lockdown key. Okay, so I'm just going to hope we don't mess it up, but I do have backups. So we have two tables here. So this table, these are common problems here, and I've affinity mapped them into requirements, workflow, workload, executive and management people, rate of improvement summary, just its bottom line summary. And here's the problem. Now, you could look at this table one of two ways. You can look at what are the problems, what are the causes, what are the solutions, and what are the benefits, and the notes is for more information. Or you can look at solutions. Actually, this is like all these solutions are part of the Amplio system. And you can go backward. These solutions solve these problems because they address these causes. That's another way to think about it. But like I said, and I'm going to be working on this to add, there are so many myths in the Agile space, just things that are wrong, that are accepted. I call them myths because they're accepted as truth when they're not. Being based on empiricism is sufficient. No, this is a fundamental flaw. And it's a lot of why we learn slow and why we have problems. Now, I'm not going to go through these, and you can zoom in to read it. Sometimes they had a big reason. And I'm about to make a page on this. I've kind of talked about this a lot. If you're interested, well, I'll make the page. There's a reference, but it's kind of hard to get to, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm making a page on the whole learning thing because I think that's a really big one. So there's some with Scrum, there's some with management. I've got some others I'm going to be running around. But like I know with the experiments, you have to run experiments to see if a feature is valid or not, or you have to run experiments to see if a change to a process is good. Now, on one hand, you could say anytime you're getting feedback, it's an experiment, but boy, that's just a weak definition. When you change lanes, driving in a car, you look to see if you're going to hit somebody, you go into the lane, you make sure you haven't hit somebody. That wasn't an experiment. You were doing something you had pretty good confidence was going to work. So there are times you might have to run an experiment. If you're building a new product, then you might need to run an experiments like a la MVPs, the startup way. But my experience in the 80s and 90s when I wrote a lot of software was that I was not running experiments with customers. And I've written a case study on this. I'll put a link in for that too, because this is a big fundamental myth that you can't tell what the customer wants. There is an approach, and I've written about this. Anyway, here's what I want y'all to do. I want you to review this. I want you to ask me questions. So I'm not going to give any more material. I'm just going to keep adding some stuff. I want you to review, and I want you to do one of a couple of things. If you disagree with anything in either table, those are the things I really want to talk about. Okay. But if they prompt like, hey, Al, I want you to talk more about this. I have this problem or something like that. Then put it in the chat or just talk. Everybody, nobody's muted. Well, unmute yourself and talk. You don't have to wait for me to acknowledge you because I may or may not see you. And I'll bring the chat up too so I can see the chat over here. Great. Oh, it doesn't look, no, we need to, here, I'll put, oh, great. Yeah, Tony did it. Thank you, Tony. Okay. Okay, so go, that's it. You guys have to now prompt me with questions. I'm gonna be adding to this list as you work and just ask me questions or challenge me on any of these things. If you think, no, that's not a myth, that's true, I definitely want to hear those. That's kind of a working session.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. What's up, Tina?
I'm fine. This is the first time I'm joining this
Oh, great.
section.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, so I'm a Scrum Master for over 10 years, and project manager to Scrum Master. And one thing, I just joined the team as a consultant. And the issue that I'm having is I'm pretty new there, like 6 weeks now, but I'm still having difficulty in uh, contributing to the technical meeting. So for me, it's a challenge. Apart from facilitating, is there like a course? Is there something I can do that can help me so that I can help the development team? I mean, contribute to their technical discussion. And I am thinking, is it me? I'm not overthinking it. Is it something anybody has gone through? You know,
Sure.
you like technical guys, you're talking and you're there in the meeting, you're just coordinating, you're not contributing. I feel I can help better if I'm able to contribute to the meeting.
Okay.
So that's me.
Yeah, that's a good question. Now let me just make sure I understand. Have you ever developed code?
No.
Okay, so this is a common question and a common problem, and I'll talk to it. I do have some answers for this. Um, and I haven't written them down much, but it's something I'm going to go into in the next few weeks in the ACE program. I don't know, might be a good community of practice session actually, because I don't know that you really need to know much about Amplio. So I am a heavy developer. I've written several technical books. Um, I really not trying to pat myself too much on the back, but just saying I really understood how to develop code. I was one of these 10x programmers that I can demonstrate by literally metrics where I did things way faster than anybody else. And I do mean 10 times. And I really got into it and I programmed a lot. So I know it very deeply. And I know you can't talk this deeply as a non-tech person about all those things that a really good technical guy knows. So first of all, let's make it be clear that there's a limitation to what a non-technical person can talk to a technical person about and have any credibility, because the depth of some people is very deep, very great, a lot of experience, and they won't like it if a non-technical person talks to them about technical stuff. Now, that's not saying I'm not going to answer your question. I'm just saying I'm trying to create a background.
Okay.
Now, there's another thing we talk about in the Paula Stewart in my book on coaching, which is that experts, nobody's an expert. You're only an expert in your own area. So yes, I know a lot about a lot of things, but I don't know everything about everything. I mean, that's ridiculous. And there are a lot of people who kind of think they do, and that's a real problem. So, I use the example of my wife. She's her job now is take care of me. But she was an ex-school counselor, ex-massage therapist. She's got 2 degrees in psychology. And we were known as the high-tech, high-touch couple. You can imagine who the high-tech was and who the high-touch was. And I have never thought I was smarter than her, and not just for self-preservation reasons. But the reality is I'm not smarter than her. I'm smarter than her in math and science. You got a problem in business, running a business or math, science, and all that, come to me. But if you've got a problem with getting empathy with people, how to raise kids, things like that, go to her. And I've learned a lot from her, so I'm a lot more competent than I used to be. But this is the idea, is that there is a lot of difference in expertise. So the question really becomes, what does someone who knows more about, say, flow and how to run workflow and how to get work done, which should be you. You should know more about that because that's your area. Now, this is something though that I don't buy into, the Scrum Master being this person who just facilitates or steps out and does the different ceremonies and process. You really need to know a lot more about how to do Scrum. And I think I've actually started creating here. Let me go to again, Amplio University. I'm starting to create curriculum for this. And one of the ones I've started to create is the Scrum with Amplio curriculum. It's not full, but here are some of the things we talk about in Amplio University. And it's which is really big, but this is a special track for Scrum. And this is where I'll probably add the stuff for how does a Scrum Master talk to tech people. So what we want to be clear is you need to know what your expertise is and what their expertise is. Yeah, Thomas, you want to interject something, and then I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, I would just like to add that if the problem is that the team members kind of look down at the Scrum Master because he or she is not as technical, that can also be a certain pathology that they think only technical work adds value
Yeah.
and contributes. right? And so I think part of that is also then education of the team that while the code and the technical stuff is important, it's not everything. There's the full kitting, there's the physics of flow, there's the people side of things, how human people learn and improve and so on. That doesn't depend on understanding the technical code, right? But it's also a value add. And so I would stress that part as well. Otherwise, you know, you couldn't have coaches that are not themselves experts, and that's clearly not the case.
Yeah, that's really brilliant, Thomas, and I appreciate that. Susan, your hand looks like you had a comment.
Just another thing too is that one of the big problems that developers often have is not fully understanding what it is the business wants. So if you do understand something and you see that what they're doing doesn't seem to solve that problem, ask them to explain it to you, and then ask questions from a business perspective. Because sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, I was getting to that. And that often means that they didn't think of it, but they aren't necessarily going to admit it, but they'll go off and do it.
Yeah, so really good. So what I want to do, well, this is part of the expertise. I love this quote by Einstein, presuming he said it, because sometimes he's attributed to things he didn't say, but it's like Yogi Berra. I never said half the things I said. But I love Yogi Berra. Anyway, it's like everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Okay. So what Thomas said is often developers also think they're smarter than other people because they can handle certain problems that other people can't handle. So it could be a pathology, and there is a lot of pathology there. A lot of developers think their job is to write code. That's not what their job is. Their job is to add value to the business. That ties both Thomas's and Susan's because they got to know what the business wants. And they write code to get their job done, but that's not their job. Writing code is a vehicle to getting their job done. So that's something to know. Now, maybe you can say that to them and maybe you can't. It kind of depends on your relationship, but Dev's job is to add value via writing code, writing validated, meaning tested code. So here's the question. When you look at all this stuff, if you try to give them advice on how to write code better, you're going to just irritate the hell out of them and you're going to lose all credibility. And actually justifiably so, but even worse because of the general arrogance a lot of devs have. So you're basically making a bad thing. However, there are things you can do to make their life better. Devs typically don't like, people typically don't like multitasking. So let's look at what they don't like. Devs don't like multitasking, which is basically devs don't like interruptions. Devs don't like fixing the same problem over and over again. What else don't devs like? I'll tell you, this is something you may not appreciate, but as a dev, I can say this to you. Devs don't like to write code that ultimately isn't of value. I mean, there's a lot of hubris with devs and oh, look at this cool stuff. But when they write something and it turns out not to be, most devs have a real commitment to add value and they don't like it when it doesn't. So here's my question. Here's how I would address this. And this is great because like I said, I'm actually preparing for this talk I'll be doing in the ACE program later, but you know, in a couple of weeks or so. Okay, yeah, some don't like working in pairs or mobbing. Okay, some don't. Okay, not all. Most think they don't like it, actually. So most devs think they won't like pairing or mobbing. But some will when they try it. So you only want to do this if you're going to help them. So where you have to come from is what insights can you provide to them that they don't have in an area you have the expertise? Okay. And if you don't understand the physics of flow, in other words, what we call physics of flow, let me pull that up on another board. This is also on my website, but it's the Amplio Foundations. I've had a link to this before. I need to collect these for the COP. They're available for the ACE members, but some of these things. By the physics of flow, there is well-defined behavior, and these are 10 of them. Okay, now there's not a complete list. There are probably 30 or 40 if I was to get a complete list, but you don't need a complete list. And in fact, in our last session, we talked about I probably ought to come up with just a couple to start with. One I would start with is delays in getting feedback and in taking advantage of lessons learned cause waste by not taking corrective actions quickly. That's a big one. By the way, devs know this if you point it out to them. They may know it consciously, but a lot of times people don't know things directly. So here's I'm going to kind of shortcut this a little bit and come back to it here. I'll give you the link to this. Oops. Where did that end up going? Oh, here it is. Here, let me pull back. I'll give you, this is what I call Amplio Foundations. Just realized I have a whole bunch of videos and I don't think I've put them on here. So this you'll only be able to comment. But I'm going to put a link to something in just a minute. Sorry, I'm looking. There we go. I don't know why I keep looking around for something that they do put in the same place, but okay. So there's the link to this board, but I'll show you something else and I'll put this link on the board itself. But here is a great resource I've created over the years. You can go to the website, Success Engineering Works, resources, YouTube playlists. And when I talk about foundations, this playlist, see that's the same diagram, this right here. This has got 5 hours of this stuff I'm talking about. And every now and then I've put Amplio Community of Practice. I've put some sessions here that we did in the past year or so, or months or so. This is a huge amount here to learn. But anyway, let me get back and close this one, this answer, and then I can go deeper if there are no others. What you want to look for is how can you have to come from not doing Scrum. Okay, this is number one. And by the way, if this was less you were doing, or if this was Kanban you were doing, you have to come from not doing less and not doing Kanban. So I'm not focusing on Scrum. You have to come from, you can't come from the approach. I say approach instead of method or framework because it's a more generic term. You're coming from, you must come from making the devs' lives easier. I mean, it's just simple. Because see, if you don't do that, remember I talked about, yeah, this one right here. I talked about not attending to how people learn, resist, and listen. If you don't come from making their life easier, then they will resist it. It's as simple as that. People don't resist things naturally. They resist things when it's imposed. Now, there's a caveat here. The caveat is, of course, that it must be things that add value to the stakeholders. So you can't just say do what you want. It's got to be consistent with first principles. Thomas.
Yeah, I would also caution a little bit what makes their life easier in the short term can maybe be something that's detrimental for the business in the long term, right?
Yes.
So for example, not writing unit tests or not focusing on designs or something. So I would look at it more like a coach that is trying to improve an athlete's performance and says, look, your training regimen will be uncomfortable. It will stretch you to your limits. It will be exhausting. It will be uncomfortable. But when you push through that, then you grow and you'll become a better athlete, or in this case, a better developer, better engineer. But they need to have that mindset and that understanding that their struggles are benefiting both them as an individual engineer as well as the business.
Yeah, so let's go to finally, this is all nice background. And the reason I'm spending so much time on it is twofold. One is I think it will help now that I'm going to give you some advice you can do. But also I like to reuse these recordings, these sessions, and now I can use this actually as a nice little blip on how developers do this. So this is really good. Okay, so great. Given all this background, what can we do? Now be clear. Notice this background, but notice what I put in here. Has nothing to do with Amplio, has nothing to do with Scrum, has nothing to do with any approach. It's just general. This is the realities of life. I want to be clear about that. Okay. So one thing developers can do, one thing you can make life easier, remember what they don't like. Multitasking interruptions. Talk about how to manage work in process. Now people tend to ignore that there are 3 different levels of work in process, and I haven't written this up. I have one of them written up. So one level of working up is, what are we given? What are teams given? In other words, they can be, oh, you got to get all this stuff done in the next 2 weeks. Okay, you have little control over that, except maybe you do as SM talk to the PO to not overload teams. I know I'm not answering your question yet. To not overload teams so that more value is delivered. Now that sounds hard at first, but actually, when you understand first principles here, you find that working on beyond capacity causes delays that create additional work to get done, which is waste. So you actually slow things down. And I actually have, I'm just going to make a note to Al. Let me change the color so I'll know it's to me. That's a different color. Put in link how SMs and POs work together. It's not a conflict. Yeah, I see, Susan, just a second. There is often a seeming conflict between Scrum Masters and product owners because they appear to have different motivations, but that's a symptom of not having the motivation to get the most value. Susan.
I was going to say, also, if you can encourage the product owner to say which things are the most important and work on those first, that can be a win-win.
Yeah, and that goes down to the alignment issue, which I said again. In fact, I need to put a thing around this. Okay, and now I can go back to where I was. Now I can hop to that easily. Okay, so this is something you can do for devs, but you're not talking to devs. Doesn't answer your question, but I didn't want to drop it out. Okay. Now there's another one, which is, oops. That's why I like Control Z so much. Another one is how teams work. Put link in for managing work in process. Okay. Here, in fact, I can show you something so you don't have to wait for me. Interesting. No, wrong thing. Sorry. Here we go. So here's a LinkedIn page. I'm going to put it in the chat. This LinkedIn page has some of this stuff. So if I scroll down, here's the learning path explains why you need more than empiricism. I refer to that. I'm going to make a page for this. Here's the reference to the product owner, scrum master, and lead should be working together. And this is a big one right here. Manage work in process to remove delays and lower risk. So you can talk to them about this directly, okay? Which is, I don't know if it carries the link. Oh, it does. Great. This is just a better way for them to work. This is called the focus on finishing. What this will do is directly address their being overloaded a lot. Because see, here's the problem. You could actually be given the perfect amount of work to do, but if you're not working well, then you will create additional work and be overloaded. People tend to ignore this fact. So, let me put it this way. Your team can be given the perfect amount of work to do for a sprint, but because you don't work efficiently, efficiently, yeah. Too much WIP, work in process, you create waste and are therefore overloaded. So if you can give them a way, and I talk about it here, and the way basically is you always focus on finishing. So when you've done with something, instead of looking for something new to do, see what else you can finish. Maybe it's a story, another story in a feature, so you're getting the feature done. Don't open a new feature. So I would definitely read this link here. That'll give you some more. Okay, now there's a third type. Teams getting interrupted with new work. So let's be very clear. What I'm saying here is very important to notice. Oops. I don't know. Here we go. Teams being overloaded is the worst thing that can happen because that creates additional work. It creates multitasking. It lowers efficiency. People don't like it. This is one of your main jobs, is to try to avoid this. And here, your job is to, during the sprint planning, is don't let it get overloaded. Here, it's how the teams work with the team. This is where you can talk to devs about working better, not programming better, working better. Okay, you're not the programming expert. And this is teams getting interrupted with new work. This requires the SM to talk to managers. See video on this. Okay, if you go to the, I've lost it already. That's all right. Let me go back to success engineering. Resources, YouTube. I have not got many of them, but there's this thing I call mini lessons. Oh yeah, it's always the first one. I never look first. I don't know why. So I've got two that'll be very important for you to look at. These are short. One is people don't necessarily know people in general, but I'm now talking about managers, product owners, other people don't necessarily know that the cost of interrupting a team can be very high. I'm not going to go through this, but I'll point out that I'll go through the slides. People think that if they're working here and here and I add a new feature, I'm just slowing them down this much, but they don't recognize that the interruption has cost. So you need to talk to the people who are interrupting the team to let them know there's interruption cost. Because in a sense, this is where you are. Here, you interrupt. That's what they think will happen. This is what does happen. So if they interrupt, say, oh, we can get this one thing in, then you have to be clear that this waste that they're creating, this extra work you're creating, is worthwhile. So that gives you the opportunity. It gives you the opportunity to speak to them. Okay, so here's a lot. This is something you can do, but I want to give a couple more things and then I'm going to pull this to an end because I am planning to do more of this in ACE and I'm sure I'll write about it publicly as well. So there are some things that devs are not always aware of that you don't need to be a technical person to be aware of them, okay? However, I caution you. So here's this question. Hang on. This is great. You're helping me get my job done because this is really, really something I was planning to do, and I'm doing it right here. So it's great. I mean, I'll make this neater when I get it to present. What tech stuff can they talk about? Okay, so here's one tech stuff I'll tell you right now that they can talk about. You can talk about. Tell the devs. No, I wouldn't start with tell. Ask the devs, have they ever been given a requirement that they thought they understood, but after they built it, they realized they did not understand what was wanted. Now, here's the reason you always start with a question. So there's a little coaching tip. By the way, this is something also that's kind of missing in the Agile space. When I started doing my first ACE program years ago, actually, I was amazed, it's been going on for over 2 years. No, it wasn't the ACE program. It was the dev program. I was doing an Amplio development workshop, which is like you can think of it as Scrum and Kanban on steroids. And people kept asking me, well, Al, how do I get people to understand that? And I realized that having a workshop where you learn what the approach is, but you don't learn how to convey it is not very useful, right? You can know everything, Tina. You can know all the details and be absolutely brilliant and know and answer to everything. But if you can't convey that to your people that you're working with, it's useless that you know it. I mean, in your position, if you were doing the work, it'd be useful, but so we need to integrate the conveyance. So this is where we want to attend to people. So always best to ask a question to get knowledge for several reasons. I'm going to write these down. So this is like in the ACE program, a lot of times I'll pause what I'm saying and I'll say, oh, coaching tip, because it's good to have. And I'm not, sometimes I get distracted and go off what I call squirrels, but this is a coaching tip that's useful. And the coaching tip here is it confirms you respect them, avoids resistance. So that's one thing. There's another reason. It's like Covey's. Covey's, come on. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Okay. And there's a third reason. It presents in the minds of the developer what their problem is. See, if you just tell them maybe do this and they don't think it's a problem for them, even if it is, then they're going to resist it because it's not a problem. But if you ask them and they say, I have this problem, then it presents. So here's what I do is I always ask, I best to start the question. I get that set up and then I give my answer. Okay. Suggest always asking, how will I know I've done that? By the way, this is a kind of DOD. It's not a complete definition of done. Now, notice what I'm saying here. How long does it take to say, how will I know I've done that and get an answer? Doesn't take much at all. But what you'll find is sometimes the requester doesn't know. Sometimes, even when the answer is so obvious, you are sure you don't need to ask, you will find they have a different answer. I think I've written this up someplace. Let me see. So I was working with a group of engineers, programmers, and was brought in to, why was I brought in? I was brought in to teach them more design patterns and things of that nature, but in the middle of it, I got very clear that they really didn't know anything about how to do process. This was like 2001 or something. And this was the case, I've talked to the aces about this, where these guys were arguing. One was arguing about this big tech stuff, and the other one was saying we want to do it in little steps. And I was thinking there, oh my God, goodness, how did I get in this situation? I actually had an expletive deleted there. It was did I get in this situation? Here's another coaching tip. I was very tempted to do this, but don't do that in a situation where it's going all to hell. Putting your head in your hands is not a good move. So I stayed upright, and I decided, actually, we put Scrum in. I taught him Scrum in about an hour. I've talked sometimes about Scrum is easy when you have all the right conditions. Mostly you don't have the right conditions, and that's why it takes a couple of days. But in that process, I told them one of the things you always have to do is ask, how well I know I've done that. I said, this is a cardinal thing. And anyway, these were a bunch of engineers, and they were supporting a bunch of engineers. So if engineers are talking to engineers, you'd think if somebody asked for something trivial, like show me this information, you'd get the right answer. They'd both know. I was sure. If somebody asked this question, how do you display this? I was sure how I would do it. I was sure they knew how to do it, but I told them to ask it all the time. All the time. See, then it becomes a process, it becomes a practice. It becomes something simple you do without thinking about it. And sometimes you waste 20 seconds because they tell you what you would already knew. So I can still remember this. So we're chatting now with some of their clients, and they ask for something. And they ask for something so obvious. I'm saying to myself, well, I'm not going to jump in and say they should ask this. I got to step back. And it's obvious it's a waste of time, but I want to see if they learned. And they asked, how will we do this? How would you know we've done this? And they give a different answer than we were thinking. That 30 seconds saved a couple hours. You know, that's the joke. You know, 2 days of programming can save a couple hours of planning. So what you want to do is be aware of all this. You kind of step back and have to be aware of what they're doing ineffectively. And then you have to ask them questions to get there. And you can give advice only when it has nothing to do with how you actually program, because you are not the expert there. Okay, now there's probably more, but I've covered a lot here in terms of coaching. And I think one of the problems, if you're not following me on LinkedIn, you should, and I'll tell you why. I'm about to write a chapter. We put out this book, Being a Value Coach. It's probably something you should get. Let me show you the book, but there's a chapter that's missing. Well, there's a lot missing. You can always keep adding stuff if you go to books, but there's something I realized, that we have a different style of coaching that's more of a proactive coach. So it's Being an Effective Value Coach. You can actually get an older copy on Google Docs here, but you can buy a version on LeanPub and then you get updates. But, and it's only like $10 right now. But what you want to do is, this will close it out, but a general sense of the coaching is, if you're here, you see stuff they don't see in terms of flow and work, and they're here. So this is what you see and they don't see. What you want to do is look and see, how can you get them step by step by step in the area you know, and you do that by asking questions. And I'm going to write up a little more detail on the process. Somehow we left that out of the book. It was all in there, but it was kind of scattered. And one last thing, I already gave you the link to this, but I'm going to pull it up again. This is the chapters. There's another chapter you might look at here, this Pickup 6 model, where I talk about how do you look to see what they don't see and build a step by step. This chapter in the book. Okay, Tino, that was a lot, but it was such a great question, and I knew other people had it, so I spent maybe too much time on it. But does that give you some ideas in moving forward?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
So insightful.
Okay. And of course, I will be putting this and the text up on the site. I've usually try to create these and put them up right away, but I'm falling a little behind with the last one because I need to re-record something or cut it up. But I'll get a place for all this to get up soon. Okay, does anybody have another question or want to add any extra comments on this? Here, let me go. Let me see what's going on. I don't want to do that. Wrong button. There we go. Nope. Okay. Any questions about the myths or the problems? Any problems people want to talk about? Don't worry, I won't answer it in 50 minutes because I only have 10. So I could talk faster. I'm not sure I could talk faster.
It's
2x.
What? I'm sorry, Bill?
no good. It's great. It's
Oh, okay.
very handy.
Yeah. Do you all relate to these questions? Can you, if you could tell me, are there any things here you think I'm overstating on either side? Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, I have a question on the right side,
Yeah.
pretty far at the bottom. You have a myth around complexity, namely that classifying what domain you're in is useful.
No, I said
And-
it's useless. Did I say it's useful?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
that's the myth. The
So
myth is that it's useful. It's not useful.
you answered the question.
Yeah, that's the
think-
myth. You put it down here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you
this is
scroll
really
down, if you
this
scroll
is
down,
really-
the card says the myth is that it's that classifying is useful. If you scroll all the way down on that, so just correct the word useful.
classifying what
to
domain you're
useless.
in is useful. That's a myth.
Okay, so then my question is, why do you think there's no value in that?
Okay, I'll show you. Because there's no such thing as a complex domain. Looking at it at a domain level doesn't make any sense, but great question. So let me pull up. I just wrote something on this again, and I have a video on it besides. So I had been thinking that Cynefin, I'll just mention them since they're the ones who promote this so much, that this, I'd been thinking that it was just not particularly useful, but now I'm starting to think it's really dangerous, or not dangerous. Here's, I'll give you the link to this.
Well, what might be dangerous is some conclusions that you draw once you find out which regime of complexity you are in. But
Yeah, but I'm
knowing which
saying-
regime you're in
Oops.
is definitely not useless in my book.
Yeah, I know. So let's talk about it because I think it is. And let me tell you why. So here's the problem. See, we don't really live in a complex domain. Rather, we live in domains. See, when you live in a complex domain, then what you're saying, like, oh, I'm complex. And you take your eye off the simple, complicated, and chaotic events and things that can be there because you're worried about the complexity. Now, what I'm suggesting, you're looking at the wrong thing. And by taking the eye off the ball, you're hurting yourself. Instead, what you've got is whatever domain you're in, there's a certain amount of complexity, potentially nonlinear events, complicated and simple, although everything is potentially nonlinear. So now you're looking at all of them. Now, one of the things you want to notice is that simple things can cause problems of great extent as well. In fact, I think I talk about this when I talk about cascading problems. Okay. See, our real enemy is nonlinearity, not complexity. Complexity hides some things. And there are three kinds of ways we get nonlinearity. A single event creates a big problem, like the camel that broke the camel's back. A combination of simple events, like raindrops causing a flood, or a cascading sequence of little events. This is what you should be looking at. Now, if you want to understand complexity, then I would suggest using VUCA as a model. You know, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But when you start thinking that I'm in a complex domain, then you focus on the complexity when what you should be focusing on are those things you can get feedback on that you see that unobscures what's going on. So this looking at the domain you're in takes your eye off the ball. But this is the other thing. There's no such thing as a complex domain. What does that mean? Is there not simple stuff in knowledge work? Is there not complicated stuff in knowledge work? What does it mean to say something's complex?
Well, I think at a minimum you would go against sort of the wisdom of the Cynefin model, right? That
I
there are
don't
these
think
different
there's wisdom in
regimes.
the Cynefin model. That's what I'm saying, but I'm
And
happy
by
to have a
saying there
conversation
is
about it.
no such thing as a complex domain,
Yeah, I'm challenging that. I am challenging that there's no such thing as a complex domain. There are domains that have complex relationships in them, and therefore in those domains we can't necessarily see what's happening. But let's look at it another way. There are three kinds of domains that are important to make a distinction of. So I'm actually talking about knowledge work. So Cynefin, so three kinds of knowledge work. Excuse me, three kinds of domain. So there are things like complex systems. Just a second, Susan, let me say this, and then I say. One kind of thing is I've got like weather. Weather is complex, but weather we can't do much about except prepare for whatever it's going to give us. So there are some domains we can't do anything about. Then there's the physical domain where we've done something with it, such as nuclear reactors that are complex. So to say nuclear reactors are complex is fine if that's how you mean it, but that means what that means is that I'm in a domain that has a lot of complexity in it. So if you decide that the definition of saying something is complex means it's got complexity in it, well, then if I had a lot of complexity, then I could say I'm in a complex domain because there's a lot of complexity. So maybe, Thomas, you're right. Maybe I need to define what does complex domain means. And here, let me show you what I'd say it doesn't mean. And so I actually appreciate the question because I'm going to change. Yeah, just one second. I got to let Susan go first, but let me clarify this, and then let's go with this clarification. But I'm going to just show this, and I'm going to let Susan go. So what I don't like is that you're in this, or you're in this, or you're in this, or you're in this. That's what I'm saying I don't like. Now, if you want to say a domain is complex because it has complexity in it, then I'm willing to go with that definition. But Susan, you had something you wanted to say. I didn't mean to.
I was just going to say, it sounds like this complex taxonomy is serving as a distraction in many cases to looking at what's going on.
That's what I'm saying. Yes. And it takes your eye off the ball and therefore gives you less effectiveness. But Thomas, I do agree that I need to be clear. What is the definition of a complex domain? That's really the root issue. Yeah, Andrew.
I have a slightly different take on this because to me, the domains of Cynefin represent your perception of the world at a given time. And really the whole thing is about how, and to me, a couple of insights that I've had over the last couple of days is that it's really about how well you see the systems involved in getting the behavior that you're trying to observe. So the world itself is inherently complex. That's reality.
Yes, I agree.
Or systems that we discover based on what we know and understand, then the more we have clarity and we're actually sort of moving around the things of Cynefin, those domains, which I don't like the name, but it's really, so if I understand the elements and relationships of a given system that produces an effect, then for me, that's simple because I understand it. It's a cause and effect relationship because it's in a stable environment. We're not dealing with producer product because the environment is fixed. Cause and effect is deterministic, and it's deterministic because I understand the system that's involved in producing that effect. The less I understand what is involved in producing that effect, then I get less awareness and it looks like I'm in chaos, but I'm not. I'm just seeing reality as it is because I don't have the knowledge to see the system elements that are involved in producing what I observe.
Yeah, so very good. So that's true. Cynefin is more about a perception, but then it's kind of interesting because then they should say it's about what you're perceiving. And I remember when I started, I've given up talking to Snowden because it always ends up about me instead of what we're talking about.
I
But
know.
and I'm not, he does this to most everybody, so I don't take it personally. But then this is a good point, is to say that we know the world has complexity in it. If people are involved, they're complex because you can't predict what people are going to do. And then the question is, if it's about your perception of the world, we want to acknowledge a couple of things here. So let me actually write a couple of these things stepwise down. Here we go.
This is some of what I was talking about in the post I did yesterday.
Yeah,
or the day
I am
before.
going to get to it today. Perception of complexity. So it raises the question, how do we want to look at things?
Right. And so the more systems that we know and discover, because the more we understand a particular topic, then our perception of that environment, situation, whatever, is different than somebody who doesn't see those systems.
Yeah, but here's the
Yeah,
thing. Here's my thing. A system is not complex or complicated or chaos or simple.
The system just is. It is complex.
Instead, it is a set of relationships
Yeah.
that are complex, complicated.
Well, no,
or
it's a set
simple.
of relationships, and those are labels that you can assign to levels of understanding
That's right.
of those relationships.
That's right. And we don't see all these.
Right. And the more we see, the more we think we're dealing with simplicity, cause and effect, until one of those cycle times bites us in the butt and we recognize that we actually didn't see either a relationship or an essential element that was involved. And this is his falling off the cliff from simple back into chaos.
Yeah, except it's still the wrong metaphor. So what we
No,
want to say is,
I get it, but I mean,
okay, so but
he
let's,
doesn't use systems because he doesn't like systems. This
yeah,
is his.
and the way, yeah, he totally trashed Ellie Goldratt because he's old school systems thinker, and he didn't know complexity thinking. But anyway, so the more we see, we may be, what's the word, seduced into thinking we understand. So we must always remember we are in VUCA. There's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So that is how we keep ourselves from getting seduced. And Thomas, that's where we bring complexity in. So we're always in a combination of this, but the real things we look at are not which domain are we in, but rather what are the relationships and what can we do? So these are good points.
Yeah, how do we identify elements and relationships in the environment that
That's
we
right.
have? And so
That's
the
right.
degree we've been able to do that in a way that we can understand and predict is telling us how much complexity we have actually managed to encapsulate. We haven't changed it. We haven't changed anything other than our perception of the world, because the world is just the way the world is. But
Yeah.
different people perceive the world in different ways, and it's about the systems that they see, which is back to the Shine quote.
Yeah. Now, by the way, on this link that I gave you, there's a 25-minute segment on this in the comment section right here. Okay. So I actually linked to the video right at that spot, but you can back it up if you want to see the whole thing. So Thomas, I have this feeling we're going to need another conversation on this because we've run out of time, and that's okay. And I realize, and that's why I appreciate the question, I need to restate that better. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
a distraction. But what I believe you're saying, so tell me if you're saying more than this. And I think Andrew kind of underscored this as well. What I'm suggesting is that, so there's some things we need to do. We must always remember, yeah, what I got in here, we must always remember that we don't understand everything. So in that sense, I suggest we're always in a complex situation. So we have to remember that. And that's why I like to use VUCA. We're also suggesting that looking at it from a domain point of view both takes our eye off the ball and makes it easy to give up finding what's really going on. See, this is the quote that I love from Ellie Goldert. He said, at its core, we find that there's only a few things that are driving cause and effect. He doesn't say we see them. He just says there are a few things. This is what he calls inherent simplicity. So if you're trying to figure out what domain you're in, you're not looking for those few things. In fact, he denies that these few things exist. Schwaber denies that these few things exist. People aren't looking at the first principles. Coming back to here, I'm suggesting these are the core of the few things that cause things in knowledge work. So again, I don't think I finished the 3 kinds of complexity, complex systems. So there's a complex systems of weather we can't control. There's a complex systems of nuclear reactors because of the physicalness of it. We can't control as well as we'd like because we can't get into the nuclear reactor at times. You can't change hardware instantly. You could expand that to being society and systems and all that. We can't control society and systems because it's too widespread. And then there's knowledge work, which we can control, except we can't see what's going on because of complexity. And that's why we use feedback. So when you recognize, and this is the other distraction. So there are 2 distractions. 2 distractions. Oops. Domain versus relationships. And can see what's happening. So I hear Cynefin used as a way of disempowering people. Now that's not what his intention is. His intention is to actually use it as a way to empower people to figure out what's going on. But if you have a tool or a thought process that people misuse all the time, then you have to look at why is that happening and what's the responsibility of the tool. And this is one of my big things about Scrum and Cynefin is it gets misused and nobody looks at why. Instead, they blame the people misusing it. Anyway, I think we've done with this. I kind of like this session. I think it actually gave me some good material to put up on the site. So I may try this again. There is no session next week. Next week is we do 3 weeks on, 1 week off. So I was going to send out an email to remind you all of it. But remember, no sessions next week. It's kind of my week off, and your week off for me, I suppose. So anyway, I like this. I might do this again. Send me feedback on things. Yeah. Oh, one last thing. Think about this. If you take the approach I espouse, and talking to managers, that you recognize there's some of this and let's improve this so we get to see the complex relationships and now they're no longer complex because we can understand them after the fact. And you're talking to management. Do you think you'll make more sense with management? They'll buy into any arguments you have better here than here. See, here they don't understand. Here's a way to get them to understand. That's why the other reason I like this model. It makes it easier to explain things to people so they can take actionable, they can make good actionable decisions. Okay. Any closing things? I'm going to just otherwise stop this. We good? Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Always happy for feedback via email too. This is all good. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you, Al.
Take care.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.
Bye now.
Bye all.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Just a second.